Hey, thanks so much for listening to the Ridge Community Church podcast. My name is John. I'm one of the pastors on staff at the Ridge, and our vision is to bring the hope of Jesus into every home. So as a piece of that, our goal each week is to bring you something that's hopeful and helpful. So subscribe to this podcast to make sure you don't miss any hopeful and helpful conversations. Hey everyone, and thanks for listening to this episode of the Ridge podcast. If you find today's episode hopeful and helpful, please follow or subscribe, and then rate and review so that more people can find the conversation. Now, if you're watching on YouTube, be sure to give us a follow and turn on your notifications so that you don't miss any of the things we're talking about. Now, we're in the middle of a series called I've Got Issues. We've been talking about our own personal struggles that we face and how we can overcome them. So I asked our Greenfield Ridge Kids Director, Vilar, to come onto the podcast and just chat about how we can help kids and students work through the things that they are struggling with. So Victor is not just the director of our Ridge Kids in Greenfield, but he's also a dad and a track and cross-country coach. So he's used to trying to help kids overcome a challenge. Victor shares some insight about when to talk with your kids about an issue, how to get them thinking about a topic differently, and what to do when we find ourselves or yourself comparing kids to other kids or parents to other parents. This is my conversation with Victor. Hi, Victor. Thanks for coming on the podcast.
It's great to be back, John.
Yeah. So I'm hearing a lot about all the snow that you guys are getting over in Wisconsin. So if you're listening to this podcast in June, there was a lot of snow this year. I'm curious, what's the most snow that you can remember ever getting?
And I think it's like the tall tales type thing of when you're a kid, you always remember something and it's always so much bigger than it really was.
Yeah.
But I don't know if this was specifically a dream, but I think I remember being about 6 or 7 years old, and we were in this farmhouse in Menominee Falls, Wisconsin. We rented it out, and I just remember there being so much snow, and we were just locked in our house. And I remember opening up the door, and I remember the snow because of the wind drifts and everything.
Yeah,
snow being up to like my head, and I was like. I was like, Dad, how are we getting out of the house?
Yeah.
I just remember this like moment of like, there was so much that I couldn't even walk out there. But this was probably one that my kids would say, this is the most amount of snow we've ever gotten. Because I think in our area, we got about 2 feet of snow, and we have a lilac bush out in the backyard. And my daughter, she's in 4th grade, and she's, about average height for 4th grade or whatever. We're like, go out there and save the lilac bush because all the branches were down from the snow. It like weighted it down. And so she went out there to go do it. And I'm sitting there and I'm watching her, like it's going up to her thighs as she's like walking out there to it. And I'm like, we might lose our daughter in this. So I was like, but she, that was her like stress reliever. It was like, okay, she was getting stressed, like, go out, do that. She did it. She's banging them off and licking the snow and all the other fun things. And
that's
so
amazing.
Those are the stories.
Yeah. I mean, like, you're right. That's going to be her story. She was waiting out in waist high snow, and she finally made it to the tree. And yeah, that'll be a good one. Well, hey, so here's my segue. You guys are having an issue with snow. We're in a series called I've Got Issues. Yeah. How is that?
Yeah.
Was that one of my bottom tier segues there? I think it might have been.
Yeah. So it was definitely in the bottom 10%.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. So we've been talking through this series called I've Got Issues, kind of focusing on the own issues and the struggles that we deal with and how can we wrestle through with them. The first week we covered like discontentment and how do we deal with our discontentment. And I know that one of the struggles people have, is with their kids, with kids in general. And you're a dad, you are the Ridge Kids Director of Greenfield, you coach kids and students. Yep. And so I'm sure you've had a large amount of experience, a lot of time where you like will recognize a struggle or an issue that a kid's having. And I imagine try to help them through that. And so I'd love to chat with you about, how do we see those things? How do you help a kid work through those things in a helpful and healthy way? So yeah, maybe just to start off, do you have any overall, when I ask that question, when I talk about that concept, do you have any overall thoughts that come to mind about, how do you help them see when there's something that they need to work on?
the first thing that I have to be able to really say is it depends upon the situation. It depends upon the kid. And
Yeah.
there is, today, as I discuss things here, there is no perfect answer. I think
Yeah.
a lot of times when a parent is looking how they can be able to help their kid, or a teacher help their student, or even just a coach helping their athlete, uh, there is no perfect remedy
Mm.
within all of those things. You have to be able to pay attention to the details of who that child is. Obviously, now I run a Ridge Kids, and we have 200 kids through each weekend, and we have like specific classroom management and guidelines and boundaries and rules of, hey, this is how things go.
Yeah.
But not every kid aligns with those things. And then
Yeah.
that's when we have to kind of break out and be like, okay, which ones don't? And how can we help them to connect them in some way? Like, so, just personally, I'll just kind of take a brief, real quick thing here is like with my kids, I just really start asking them questions about what they think they need to work on, and set
Mm.
a mini goal and help them attain it. Just asking questions, that really helps, because then you're really trying to dig deeper into what the core of what they're struggling with. And I think asking questions as a coach, as a teacher, as a parent are really important things, because
Mm.
we as adults know in our mind and our brain how we think we want to be able to approach this struggle,
Yeah.
but that's not how this child's thinking about it and how they
Mm.
see it. And we may have struggled with the same thing that they're struggling with. So I can give you an example. I've had anger issues in the past. It's come from my family history,
Yeah.
and I see it in my own kids. And I'm like, oh, what's going to be beneficial for me and how I approach them in their
Mm.
struggle in this right now, and
Yeah.
what they see.
So, question on that. You're thinking
Yeah.
through like what questions to ask your kid. I know that there's a tension, right? Because there
Mhm.
you don't want to like disparage or break their self-confidence. You don't want them to feel like overly, you don't want to feel them like, you
Yep.
don't want them to react like too much, you know what I mean?
Yep.
Uh and caveat to all this, I'm not a parent. And so
Yeah.
I am working from a different lens. So if I say anything or talk about anything or ask a question, it's like, you know what, John, it's not really that like that, you know?
Yep. Yep.
Um, what would maybe is a difference between questions that help kind of them come to that realization or help them get there versus the types of questions that just, I don't know, are maybe unhelpful? Does that make
Yeah.
sense?
Again, yeah. I think staying away from questions that are going to get you yes, no answers,
Hmm.
as opposed to ones that have to make them elaborate on what they're thinking.
Hmm.
Uh, if they're struggling with homework,
Yeah.
uh, instead of like, well, what are you doing? Or you have to be able to kind of get to the core of like, well, what did the teacher say about that? How do they want this to be able to be done? And if they don't know that, you're like, okay, well, then how can I be able to help in being able to do this or that? It's trying to be able to get a little bit more information, because I think it's so easy that we can see a struggle, and just as human beings, we can automatically start to diagnose what we
Yeah.
think they should do,
Yeah. That's good.
or what they think we should do or not. And so in doing that, just keep conversation open and going, because I think once the shutdown happens, there's more internalization. And I've seen
Mm.
a lot of kids and adults is, once they've been hurt in
Mm.
certain areas, it's harder for them to get it back out to the open. Or once they're
Gotcha.
nervous about talking about it, it's one of those things. And I'm trying to think of an example. Yeah, just think of an example of one of my daughter's friends at school is that she cannot ask the teacher for help because that looks like a sign of weakness. That's a
Mm.
struggle right now in schools. It's like we tell as parents, we're like, ask the teacher for help. Well, then on the other side of this, there are kids that are struggling to ask their teacher for help because they think they'll be judged because of
Mm.
it. And so they don't do it. And then they
Yeah.
continue to struggle. And the parents will talk to the teacher, talk to the teacher. And so now we have to be able to like, all right, well, that didn't work. It's again setting goals of what you talked about before of you have to be you have to be talking about many different things. When I do marriage counseling or premarital with couples, and they're talking about a specific struggle that they're having,
Yeah.
we don't just sit there and we talk about, um, okay, here's your problem, here's your issue, figure it out. One of the things that I like is write down 10 ways that
Mm.
you could be able to move beyond this. And then you two together pick one of those 10. Now, when you do picking out 10 things, what that does is it gets your brain stirring and thinking about more together of how we can work together. And you end up choosing a lot of times the seventh, eighth, ninth idea. Many times we don't get to that seventh, eighth, ninth idea because if you don't write them all out,
Yeah.
you don't know what your options are. And so I think it's really a great thing of just being like, okay, they're struggling with their homework. And I'm just using this as the example
Sure.
again.
Yeah.
They're struggling with their homework. They can't finish it each night. Well, hey, why don't we sit down and write out, it might be harder for a kid to get to 10 ideas, but 5 or 6 ideas of ways that we can help you get your homework done well. And what are ways that we can do that? As opposed to sometimes parents can be like, well, why don't you just do this? Why don't you just do this? And I'm guilty of that. I'm guilty. I
Yeah.
parent in a different way than my own wife parents. So we have to come together and talk about it because she's the fixer. And I'm the one that's like, I want them to independently figure out a way that they can do it. So
Yeah.
it's their excitement and their
And
goal
how
and
do
their
you utilize both of those gifts together? Yeah.
Yep.
So you see your kid does something, right? Maybe we can use it like an anger issue, right? They do something in anger, right? How do you know a situation in which, okay, I need to address this right away to solve a solution, and maybe you address it in some capacity, right?
Yep.
Versus knowing when to say, okay, I need to come back to this in a couple hours, maybe tomorrow, and re-bring it back up in a time where maybe they're like less emotionally heightened, or like, how do you tell the difference between those types of things?
That's a great point. Because when I have a struggle and when it's with someone else, I want to fix it right away.
Yeah,
I was
I'm the same way. I'm the same way. Yeah,
I want to fix it right away because I stir on it then. But it's good to have that pause. Again, it's that pause button of what needs to be happening. So let's just say, your kid just completely flips out, anger issue, like all the emotions flying off the handle type of thing. And you're like, well, what do we do? And you need to be able to have a break from that. Because discussing it with them when they're heightened emotionally for any of us, not usually the best idea.
Yeah.
You need to be able to have time to think on why you reacted, why you responded that way, and talk about it. The one thing I've noticed a lot of parents and even adults still do is like, hey, we will need to talk about this later. They are famous last words. We need to talk about this later. Because guess what? It's an uncomfortable conversation. So what do? We don't talk about it. We ignore it and we think, oh, everything's better now until it comes back again. And then it comes back again. And then we always think, oh, we're good again. And the best advice I can be able to give is make sure you schedule that time to go back to it. So figure out that time of like when are they usually having a better time of the day? Is it in the morning? Is it at night? And I know that I got this idea, and my wife and I don't practice as much, but a part of it is like have a scheduled time per week where you just sit down with your kids and you're saying, today's the day we're just going to talk about some of the struggles we're having and like how we can get through them. And a lot of times for us, I think it's bedtime. It's really interesting that our kids, they really calm down and they really just get into that lovey-dovey type mode. And I think it's partially because they don't want to sleep and partially because they just like have lots of thoughts going on, whatever it is.
Yeah.
But they get very chatty. And sometimes I just want to go right to sleep. Lindsay, my wife, she's amazing. This is where I think she gets really great connection with the kids. And they just start opening up. They just start opening up and talking about, man, you know what, Mom? This is what was happening in my day today. And this is what I'm really struggling with it. And in Lindsay's way, she would start giving advice and saying, hey, this is how I can be able to help. Mine, I would just that's when I would lean in and be like, well, what do you think you could do tomorrow to be able to help that? And just get them. Yeah. I really like to approach it. And again, this is why there's no right answer because Lindsay and I do it in such different ways. And I think they're both very effective.
Yeah.
And for me, and I ask questions about, hey, I try to empower them. I try to empower them to be able to help them make their own decision on it and what they can be able to do as opposed to, oh, Dad just told me that I should do it this way.
Yeah.
Then it's a part of like, hey, Dad helped me think through this. And that's where I think it's important too, as parents. We talk about this in child dedication. When I have the parents and they're saying what child dedication again is just parents taking the step that they are going to proclaim to others that they're going to raise their kid in a way that helps them find and follow Jesus. So that's just what that is. And when we do that, I tell the parents, I'm like, find other people in your life, family or friends that you know your kid could go to and connect with too. So let's just say you want your kid to be compassionate, but you know you're not compassionate, and your wife's
Sure.
not.
Yeah.
Maybe they're not as compassionate as you think. Like again, like what Jody talked about in her message too. Like we always think we're way better at certain things than we really are, but we do notice the people that do it well. And if you know compassionate people in your life, and you want to hang out with those people. You want your kids to hang out around those people and involve them in your life. So making sure that when you see those struggles, that you have others that you can kind of go to and be like, hey, I noticed this as you a part of it. And that's where you can be able to ask for help, as opposed to even just the amounts of information that's in books and internet and things like that. Those are still helpful, but it can be overwhelming. So I might have went down a different trail there, but
No, you're good. I think you touched on a couple of really good things that I just want to highlight real quick. I think one, you know your kid, you know your student, you know when they're going to be in the place where they're kind of most receptive to hearing and working through those problems. And choosing those times, I think, can be super helpful. And that's true for anybody, right? Like it's like if you talk to me about an issue at 6 a.m. right when I wake up, it's like, am I going to be as responsive as I could be? And so I'm sure some people are listening to this like, he wakes up at 6 a.m. I wake up at 4:15. Everybody got their own things. Anyway.
Yep. Again.
Yeah, exactly. So knowing that great time to connect, I think, is really powerful. And the other thing I think you touched on is, when you are struggling with a similar issue to your kid, because that makes sense, right? If you have something that you're particularly like, it's like a weakness for yourself or an issue that you struggle with, it makes sense that there are times when your kids or people you're influencing might show similar traits, and being willing to like help your kids be surrounded by other people that are maybe gifted in that area. Because everybody's got their own unique gifts and strengths and weaknesses. And so having like your kids able to have relationships with people that can speak into those elements. And frankly, it may be something that they're not like, an extra voice that just reinforces those things that you're trying to help them learn too.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think another point, just to kind of add to that a little bit though, too, is as a parent, and it can be very humbling, but let them know what you struggle with too. I think they might be, don't worry, your kids probably can tell you what you struggle with before you tell them, but let them know you struggle with it too. Like when I sit down and I talk with my son about things, I say, let's work on this together. Like I struggle with this. Here's in my experience, these are things that have helped me and done it, but it might be different for you. Yeah. And I might be willing to learn, and you might be able to teach me some things too. And like, I love just this aspect of being able to like partner up with them and be able to say, hey, let's work on this together. Let's do it. Because part of it too, and I think adults struggle with this, but kids especially, they feel like they're the only one struggling with it. They feel like they're all alone in it. Even though there's millions and thousands of kids that you can point out that are struggling with similar things, let them know that you're with them. Let them know that they have a partner in it too.
I'm curious, what do you do? What's been helpful when your kid, or maybe it's even a student or a kid that you're coaching, doesn't see the issue that you see? You see them like, okay, you struggle with this, whatever it may be. Maybe it's comparison, whatever thing that they wrestle with. Yeah. And they're like, I don't know. Are they like, either they're saying it or their body language is telling you they don't think that this is an actual thing that they struggle with or have as an issue.
Classic.
Is there anything that you found that can be helpful to help them connect that is actually an issue?
Um, Part one of that is if you're really invested in that kid. I mean, like obviously as a coach, like when I have 100 kids and I see, pride and all these different things on that, I'm like, there's sometimes just like, well, I'm not going to have much time to really invest in that kid because he's moving on to high
Sure.
school next year, or whatever,
Yeah.
that type of thing. But when it's someone that you're invested with that you're going to be around and around a lot, is the first thing I can really give as the best and biggest advice is don't give up. Don't give up. Because I think there's going to be so many different things. And I think one of my classic dad lines from my dad to me that he's filled with them. But he'll look at me and he just knows I'm a man of faith now too. And he's not really. I mean, I don't know where he is,
Sure.
but he'll look at me and just really in an endearing way. And he'll just be like, "Hey, Victor, don't give up on me yet. Don't give up on
Mm,
me." Like he doesn't want to be, he doesn't want to be, he was given up on by so many people in his life.
mm,
And I think there's something to be said about that is we can just, when we're frustrated and we're at wit's end and we tried 17,000 different things, we're just like, I have nothing. I have nothing left.
mm.
And a part of the not giving up is just being present every single time. Maybe it's asking again, similar questions. Maybe you just try to tweak questions in different ways, but showing up. I hear so many horror stories of just from kids that have grown up and just being like, oh yeah, my parents just kind of stopped caring, or and I don't
Mm,
think parents stop caring. I think they get so overwhelmed. They get
yeah.
so overwhelmed and they just don't know what step to take next. And they don't, and they just get trapped. And
Yeah.
then they're like, I'm just in this cycle and I can't get out of it. And it's waking up each morning, setting a different mindset of just being like, I'm here. This is what God's called me to be upon, and stepping up and be like, I'm not giving up. I'm not giving in, to be there because this child is my responsibility, whether it's your own kid, whether it's you're a teacher of a kid. And sometimes when you have more smaller, coaching opportunities, I think this is where, like a basketball coach where you don't have as many kids, and sometimes maybe in soccer, but like where you can have a little bit more of that investment,
Yeah.
more one-on-one and those connections and conversations to be able to see that. And you see, and I know you talked a little bit more about like the things that um, you see in them and you hope for them, but that nothing's ever changing. For me, I just always keep leaning into that area.
Mm.
So this is might be a little bit more of the jerky side of me of like I see it and I point it out in different ways of just of opportunities of like, hey,
Yeah.
um, let's just say someone's really arrogant and they're just all about themselves,
Mm.
and they're an athlete. And let's just say they only want all individual events, but hey, there's an opportunity to do this relay, and
Yeah.
there's four people together that need to be able to work on it. And they're like, no, I don't want that. I want to do the open 400 and I want to do the open 200. I just want to be this. Um, and so it's just always a different conversation and bringing up different ways of like, hey, you know what? I was like, this is more of a team mentality. This would help the team, like
Mm.
always keeping that team reference, that team concept as opposed to the I, like, again, all the famous cliche words that you can throw in there now.
Yeah.
There's no I in team, but there is a me,
Yeah.
so those types of moments where I just really just try to lean into that kid and give them different opportunities to look and say, hey, guess what? There's this team. There's these coaches that are here that are for you, and you can choose to be a part of it or not be a part of it. But
Yeah.
I don't let it derail who we are trying to be as a team. I'm just
Mm.
saying, hey, this individual right here, we care about who you are. You are still here. You're still considered family and you're still considered a teammate here. Even if you don't think it and you don't like it and you don't want it,
Mm.
it might not work that year. Let's just say they're an eighth grader. But I've talked to many students, whether they were high schools, now in college, or now adults, that have come back and said, thank you for pointing that out. Thank you for doing that. Because sometimes you don't know when that lesson means something.
Mm.
It's kind of like the whole way that we teach God. Like we can't make somebody love Jesus or love God, but them knowing about him and what he can do for them, can make such a big difference down the road. And that's the same way of not giving up and taking the opportunity you have to teach them the values of what it looks like. Does that make sense?
Yeah. So a little bit different direction here. I feel like we're talking about this, right? Everybody, I'm sure you can see, okay, my kids are struggling with this, whatever. One of the things we talked about the first week of this series was the concept of discontentment. And I'm sure many parents can connect with that, feeling discontent with, either their kids' behavior or themselves as parents. There's so many different elements to that. And I think that we talked about this root issue of being comparison. And I feel like this conversation probably wouldn't be complete without just a little bit about, okay, you may recognize the things that your kid is struggling with, and you're working on trying to help them. But I also want to hear, like, okay, how do you avoid, or what do you do when you are comparing maybe your kids to somebody else's kids, or yourself as a parent to another parent?
Oh gosh, what is the quote? Comparison is the thief of joy.
Yeah.
And what it does, that's not quoted by me, just so you know. That's someone else
Vilar.
someone much more famous and
Yeah.
more knowledgeable than me in life. But I can't even remember who it was that said it. It is probably one of the biggest things that I see as a struggle for kids and adults. Yeah, that discontentment, but just comparing themselves to others. But it's also the thing of what we do to help us tell us that we're doing okay.
Okay.
If that makes sense. Like,
yeah,
to be able to be like, yeah, to think about it in the sense that, like, hey, yeah, we're struggling with this and we don't have this, but we do have a house over our heads. And, so they don't, but we do. And so, like, that comparison of, like, hey, but we're okay, but we're okay just by nature of what it is. And it's so hard. It's so hard because
what I'm
go ahead.
You say is that, like, if you're feeling that, you're not alone. You're not the only one doing that comparison.
Yeah, because I think it's one of those things that we all use it. It's just a matter of how do we use it in healthy ways and not unhealthy, like, which is hard because comparison.
So is that like using that as like, oh, I know that they're like, I love the way that their kids are doing this thing. Let me ask them a question about how they do that thing. So is it kind of like asking good questions and celebrating that?
Yeah, I really do agree with that, because to find any bargain or deal, you have to compare things. Like to see it and look to find it, be like, yes, this is a much better deal. We need to go do that. And so by comparison, like, we're like, okay, that's helping us do that. Now, when we're sitting here and, everybody's getting the new water bottle. This is an issue that I've heard from in grade school. Everybody's getting the whole new water bottle, and I don't have
that Stanley cup. You know what I mean?
I'm not bringing the new water bottle. Yeah, it's Stanley. It's exactly what it is. It's Stanley right now, and I have an Owala. And now the Owala is not cool enough anymore, even when I got it 6 months ago. And I'm not cool enough now because I don't have the right water bottle. So there's this comparison based off of just a material thing, water bottle, that all of a sudden now has thrown a whole loop in at least 2 nights a week of crying. And
so how do you have that conversation? Is that like,
that's good. That's a good question.
Is that hey, it's okay. I don't know. Like, how do you have that conversation? Because I think as adults, we struggle with this, right? We see they've got a nice house. I wouldn't mind that car,
Exactly.
Is it sharing with them that you struggle with that too? Like, what does that look like?
I think that's a part of it. I think you have to be able to let know. And this is a quote that I have created a little bit, but things that we struggle with in our middle school and high school years, are a lot of the things that we've still carried with us into our adulthood. Just think about the concept of the things that we never dealt with and that we're still dealing with. Like we take it with us into our adulthood. And it's just, that's the part of the unbrokenness of who we are as adults. So we, in many times, in many ways, chose unhealthy ways to either bury them or shove them off to the side because we had to go to the next thing.
Yeah.
And now we're sitting here and we're looking at our children struggle with those same things. And there's a disconnect even with our kids that we're looking, because we're like, I never dealt with that. And so we say, just brush it off, just move on, be strong, or oh, honey, it's okay. We have so many good things. And, so we either go to the really soft side of things or the really hard, and there is this medium thing of like, yes, it's a part of what I talked about before of like asking questions about why is it so important and being able to hear their story, and just say, like for our kids, we know that's like, we don't have the money to just go out and buy the next new water bottle and the next new water bottle and the next thing. So it's like, you have one, it works. And you're not going to be happy with us today, but, I still want to be able to hear your story. And I think that's a part of where I really struggled for a long time is I have this, like, I found a way to be strong and just move through things. And I didn't deal with a lot of things. So when I see my kids, I'm like, hey guys, it's really not a big deal. Or I roll my eyes. I'm like, oh, I can't believe we're flipping out about this again. And I'm like, oh. And so for parents, I think when your kid is struggling through and doing these things, it's really important. Obviously other than giving up and listening, it's your body language and your first response, first response. And I think I remember this with when a lot of, in the time that we're going through in the last 10, 15 years of students just coming out saying like, if they're gay or bisexual or not, that there's this component of like, when interviews were done with them, that they looked and they're like, well, how did you know that your parent was okay with it or not? And they're like, well, I looked at their body language. And if you're sitting here like this and they tell you, and you're like, there's almost like that, they see that. And that's their first reaction of what they always remember of that. That's where they struggled. And they're like, well, I didn't know that you cared, so there's that component there of it's our response. It's our initial response of what your kids remember. And they hang on to that. There's been a few things that I've had an initial response to some very small things with my kids that I'm still fighting to get back now. Like, cause they just think, oh, dad's just always going to get mad about that. Dad's always going to get mad about that. Even when I only did it once or twice on certain things, they're set in their mind. That's how he responded. And that's where I'm set. And so it takes work to re-dig some of that stuff up and be like, they're not going to always remember what the exact moment or the exact thing was, but it's stuck in their brain now that's their response. That's mom and dad's response. So really just make sure you're leaning into your kids and you're listening. And so again, all different parenting tips and all different parenting styles. There are thousands out there. There's no specific, your kid, and maybe you don't feel like you know your kid. So maybe that's the opportunity to get to know your kid, keep leaning in, get to know your kid, So.
Yeah. Victor, thanks for chatting with me about this stuff. I know that dealing with issues in general isn't a super fun conversation and topic, but I think you've shared a lot of really great stuff about just the importance of those conversations and understanding who your kid is and hearing their story and then asking questions to help work through those things. And more importantly, just not giving up and just recognizing that, it doesn't have to be that, it's not going to be that instant fix. It's not going to be that one conversation and all of a sudden they'll never compare themselves to another kid again.
Sorry.
But But, maybe you give them the tools and the strategies and the questions that help them along that journey. And maybe they don't fully take advantage of it till later. And then they remember, who's to say? So,
yeah.
So thanks, Victor.
You're very welcome. I really hope it's just helpful just to be able to listen to any one little nugget of truth to help just take and try. And that's really what these podcasts are about, to be able to help out. And that's good.
Well, that was my conversation with Victor. And I think my takeaway from our conversation really is like a 3-step approach. One, pick a time that you know that they will be most receptive to hearing you. Ask them questions as a means to help them process through that struggle. And then don't give up if it doesn't happen right away. The other thing that I would add is just to invite God into the situation as well. Pray for your kids to grow in that area, and then also for you to have the wisdom to help them grow in that area. Thanks for listening to this episode of the Ridge Podcast, and make sure to follow and subscribe so that you don't miss any hopeful and helpful conversations.